8.
Warren G. Harding, the 29th President of the United States, is widely regarded as one of the most corrupt presidents in American history. His administration was plagued by scandals, corruption, and mismanagement, which ultimately led to his sudden death in 1923. Harding's administration was embroiled in a scandal involving the Secretary of the Interior, Albert Fall, who accepted bribes from oil companies to lease public oil reserves at Teapot Dome in Wyoming and Elk Hills in California. Harding's administration awarded government contracts to friends and supporters, often without competitive bidding or proper oversight. Harding's campaign in 1920 was heavily financed by wealthy donors, including industrialists and politicians who later became involved in scandals. Several members of Harding's cabinet were involved in scandals, including his Secretary of Commerce, Herbert Hoover, who was accused of embezzling government funds. The Secret Service was involved in several scandals during Harding's presidency, including allegations of theft, embezzlement, and illegal activities. 7. Andrew Jackson, the 7th President of the United States, is considered one of the most controversial presidents in American history. Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act in 1830, which led to the forced relocation of thousands of Native Americans from their ancestral lands to Indian Territory. Jackson was embroiled in a scandal known as the Petticoat Affair, which involved his wife Rachel Jackson's marriage to him being questioned due to her previous marriage not being officially annulled. Jackson was accused of using his influence to secure a large loan from the Tennessee State Bank at a favorable rate, despite being a major shareholder in the bank. Several members of Jackson's cabinet were involved in scandals, including Secretary of War John Eaton, who was accused of embezzling government funds and using his position for personal gain. Jackson was a land speculator and used his presidency to further his own financial interests. He acquired large tracts of land through dubious means, including buying land from Native Americans at unfair prices.
6.
Richard Nixon, the 37th President of the United States, is widely regarded as one of the most corrupt presidents in American history. Nixon's administration was embroiled in the Watergate scandal, which involved the break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters in 1972 and subsequent attempts to cover it up. The scandal led to widespread public distrust and ultimately resulted in Nixon's resignation in August 1974. Nixon secretly recorded many conversations in the Oval Office, which became known as the Nixon tapes. These recordings revealed evidence of his involvement in the Watergate cover-up and other scandals, including his efforts to intimidate and reward politicians, judges, and government officials. Nixon's re-election campaign committee was found to have accepted illegal campaign contributions from foreign sources, including the government of Japan. Nixon's presidency was marked by a culture of secrecy and abuse of power, including his use of executive privilege to withhold information from Congress and his attempts to use government agencies to spy on political opponents.
5.
Ulysses S. Grant, the 18th President of the United States. Grant's administration was embroiled in the Whiskey Ring Scandal, a widespread bribery and tax evasion scheme involving whiskey distillers, government officials, and politicians. The scandal led to the resignation of several high-ranking officials, including Grant's Secretary of the Treasury, John B. Morton. Grant had financial difficulties before and during his presidency, which led him to rely on wealthy friends and donors for financial support. Grant's administration was accused of taking kickbacks from the Credit Mobilier Construction Company, which was building the Transcontinental Railroad. The scandal involved millions of dollars in bribes and kickbacks to politicians and government officials. The Star Route Postal Scandal involved the awarding of lucrative government contracts to postal routes to crony companies at inflated prices. Grant's presidency was marked by allegations of influence peddling, with wealthy donors and interests seeking favors from the administration in exchange for campaign contributions and other forms of support.
4.
James Buchanan, the 15th President of the United States. Buchanan's administration was criticized for its lack of action on the issue of slavery, which was a growing source of tension in the country. He failed to take a clear stance on the issue, instead choosing to defer to Congress and state governments. Buchanan's administration was accused of supporting the Lecompton Constitution, which would have admitted Kansas as a slave state. The Constitution was rejected by Congress, but Buchanan's support for it was seen as a betrayal of his earlier promises to oppose the expansion of slavery. Buchanan's presidency was marked by intense partisan politics, with Republicans accusing him of being beholden to Southern Democrats and pro-slavery interests. There were allegations of kickbacks and embezzlement within the administration, including accusations that Buchanan himself took bribes from railroad companies.
3.
Franklin Pierce, the 14th President of the United States, is often criticized for his handling of the Kansas-Nebraska Act and his inability to address the growing tensions leading up to the Civil War. Pierce signed the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854, which allowed new states to decide for themselves whether to allow slavery. This led to pro-slavery and anti-slavery forces clashing in Kansas, resulting in violence and bloodshed. Pierce's administration was criticized for its support of the Dred Scott decision, which ruled that slaves were not citizens and had no right to sue in court. Pierce was accused of making a corrupt bargain with Southern Democrats during his presidential campaign, agreeing to support their policies in exchange for their support. Pierce's administration was criticized for its failure to pass the Crittenden Compromise, which would have restricted slavery in new states and territories. The compromise was seen as a chance to address the growing tensions over slavery. Pierce appointed several judges who were sympathetic to slavery, including Roger Taney, who wrote the majority opinion in the Dred Scott case. James Madison, the fourth President of the United States. Madison's decision to declare war on Great Britain in 1812 has been criticized for being poorly planned and executed. The war was unpopular with many Americans, and some historians have argued that Madison's desire for a declaration of war was driven more by a desire to assert American independence and prestige rather than a genuine threat to national security. During the War of 1812, Madison suspended habeas corpus, which allowed him to detain suspected enemies of the state without trial. This move was criticized by many as an abuse of power and a violation of individual rights. Madison's administration was criticized for its treatment of Native American tribes, particularly during the War of 1812. The government's policies towards Native Americans were often coercive and exploitative, leading to significant loss of life and cultural destruction. In 1808, Madison had a newspaper editor, William Duane, imprisoned for publishing articles critical of the administration's handling of foreign policy. This move was seen as an attack on freedom of the press. 1. Andrew Johnson, the 17th President of the United States, is often criticized for his handling of the Reconstruction era after the Civil War. Johnson's administration was criticized for issuing pardons to many former Confederates who had committed treason or supported the Confederacy during the Civil War. This led to widespread outrage and accusations that Johnson was coddling rebels and undermining the federal government's authority. Johnson used his veto power to block legislation passed by Congress, which was intended to protect the rights of newly freed slaves and ensure their access to education, land, and voting rights. Johnson's administration implemented black codes in southern states, which were designed to restrict the rights of African Americans and maintain white supremacy. In 1868, Johnson became the first and only president to be impeached by the House of Representatives. He was accused of high crimes and misdemeanors for violating the Tenure of Office Act, which prohibited him from firing certain officials without Senate approval. Johnson's administration was plagued by scandals, including corruption, cronyism, and embezzlement. His vice president, Schuyler Colfax, was accused of embezzling government funds, and several high-ranking officials were forced to resign due to allegations of misconduct. And there you have it, our countdown of the top 8 most corrupt presidents in U.S. history. From scandals to bribery, these leaders have left a lasting impact on American politics. Thanks for watching Memento Solis. If you liked this video, be sure to subscribe for more videos like this one.